On the back of your bulletin, you will find the questions of the Lord's Day and the Catechism. I'd like to ask you to respond to those questions with the answers as I pose those questions. Does not God then do injustice to man by requiring of him in his law that which he cannot perform? No, for God so made man that he could perform it. But man, through the instigation of the devil, by willful disobedience, deprived himself and all his descendants of those divine gifts. Will God allow such disobedience and apostasy to go unpunished? Certainly not. But he is terribly displeased with our inborn as well as our actual sins, and will punish them in just judgment in time and eternity, as he has declared, "Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them." But is God not also merciful? God is indeed merciful, but he is likewise just. His justice, therefore, requires that sin, which is committed against the most high majesty of God, be punished with extreme, that is, with everlasting punishment, both of body and soul. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 24 particularly, that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, that you put on the new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. So man was righteous. If I took you back to Genesis chapter 1 and the last verse, God saw that all that he had made was very good. He had already said the things were good, but his conclusion was it was very good. It adds an adjective to it to emphasize it. Man wasn't in sin when he was created. Man wasn't sinful when he was created. However, something happened. In God's providence, in God's care, something occurred. That something, of course, was the coming of sin. Through the instigation of the devil, by willful disobedience, Adam and Eve, and he's speaking here particularly Catechism about Adam, deprived himself and all his descendants of those divine gifts. Adam sinned. Eve sinned. So you have here one of the things that needs to be said. It was the instigation of the devil. It was the intuition of Eve. It was the not following his duty of Adam that brought about sin into the world. And that sin is what gives us the world we see. A world where there is not only sin, but evil, things that are hard, things that are tough and difficult, that take lives. Those are the things that came because of our sin. That needs to be said. The Catechism's saying it. The Catechism's saying it because it's going to go on to follow through now about man's redemption, but it's talking about now what was the problem. The problem was our sin. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 12, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread through all men, because all have sinned." So our sin is credited to us, first of all, because we're related to Adam. Secondly, because we've done it all gladly. We've fallen into it. We do it. That's what we are, not just what Adam was. We said it last week when we were talking about some of this. We as American citizens get blamed for what Trump does. We'll get blamed for what Biden does. We'll get blamed for what Congress does. We'll get blamed for what the Supreme Court does, because they represent us. And as the representative, we get blamed for what they are, because we're part of them. In that same sense, we are part of Adam, and we get credited, blamed with his sin. But we also sin. Something happened there that is different than what sometimes happens in other cases, and that is our nature was changed. Adam and Eve's nature suddenly became what doesn't trust God. And since they don't trust God, they don't have to obey God, or they don't have to believe what God says. After all, you go back and you read Genesis 3. When Eve saw that the fruit of that tree was good looking and good for food, and be desired to make one wise, she took and she ate. And she gave to Adam, and he took and he ate. What they said was, Satan said God wasn't telling us the truth. He might be right. And that became the hallmark of man's life. God said this in the Bible. Who says the Bible's right? How many times in our society do you have people say, you believe the Bible? Why? That's just a collection of men's writings. It's just as good as the Rig Vedas. In fact, it's probably as good as Mark's. That's what happened to us. That is the sin in which we all live. Will God allow such sin to go unpunished? From Hebrews chapter 9, verse 20. As it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment. So God's punishment was, we die. And after we die, then there's judgment. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. That's what happened to us. God has shown what he is. We look at it and we say, that may not be true. We don't usually say it that way, please. I'm not accusing any of you of saying it that way. But I confess to you that there are times when I act like it. Yeah, God said it, but I don't feel up to it today. And so the sin is mine, just as much as it was Adam's, just as much as it was Eve's. But is God not also merciful? If I went back to Exodus chapter 34 and looked at verses 6 and 7. Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands and forgiving the iniquity and transgression and sin, but by no means clearing the guilty. Is God merciful? Yes. How can I prove that God is merciful? Can you breathe? If God had been unwilling to forgive sin, if he'd said, I'm never going to forgive it, then what would have happened as soon as Adam and Eve sinned is the whole world would have stopped. If the sun came up today, then God's demonstrating his mercy. If you can breathe, God's demonstrating his mercy. He's not as merciful as we might like him to be, maybe, but he is eminently merciful in everything that he does. However, he is also just. From 2 Corinthians chapter 6, beginning at verse 14. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? What communion has light and dark with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them. I will walk among them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh. So God is just. God is merciful. If he has called us to repentance, that's part of his mercy. If he has granted us repentance, it's a demonstration of his mercy. And if he has given us faith, that's the proof that he is merciful. For he's looked at us and he said, that's a sinner. But I substituted myself in his place. Therefore, in my justice, I can't punish him twice. If I substituted him for him and I was punished in his place, then I can't punish him again. Because I'm just. And that's the case of how his justice becomes his mercy.